Hi guys, thank you for joining me for this edition of Color and Beauty. My name is Tenaj Astrid and it is Fashion Friday. This Fashion Friday, we are going over the history of shapewear. Now, shapewear, if you don't know, are the things that help support the undergarments here. The purpose of them is to make a silhouette, and these things have been around a very long time. So we're going to get right into it. So we are going to start with my brows, and we're also starting in 1600 BC in Greece. The cool thing about shapewear is you often think of just what we have going on now, which is, Spanx and the different variations of it. But like I said, it dates all the way back to the before times, literally in BC. So the Minoans, they created these undergarments that accentuated the hips and the breasts, but they didn't cover the breasts. So it was essentially these, I guess, almost like waist trainers, really. The Minoans, or the Cretans, as they were also known because this was on the Isle of Crete, they just embraced the female shape, and they used these types of corsetry to, accentuate that. So in this time, even then, they were embracing, the hourglass figure that we still aim for today, which is, I find that to be pretty amazing, that standards for what we think is the ideal body is still pretty much the same as it was thousands of years ago. If we move on to the time in Greece before Alexander the Great, girdles were introduced, and they were actually metal girdles back then. And these metal girdles were decorated and embellished. And actually, if you guys know anything about the Iliad, which is actually one of my favorite fables, because of course I have a favorite fable. Yeah, there are points in there where they're talking about being tempted by mistresses, and they talk about taking off their metal garments to do so. So it's quite evident that that's what was going on back then, which I think is pretty cool. Well, maybe not the tempting part, but the fact that they had girdles, that's what I was leaning towards. Now, I would imagine that you would still need to have some money to have, a decorative armor, basically. So they did have other forms of girdling that they used with soft linen and leather. So again, they're trying to achieve this hourglass shape even before Alexander the Great. And to prep my eyes, I'm going to be using the e.l.f. Stay All Day because it's just a good eye base. Now, I'm actually a little bit inspired by this very bright yellow shirt that I'm wearing in the middle of fall. I don't know why I reached for it. I just wanted to wear it today. So I'm going for the 18 Hit Wonders e.l.f. eyeshadow palette. I'm definitely going to use that yellow in here, but I think I'll make the rest of it fall-like, I guess. I don't really know where I'm going with this, but you guys will get to go on that journey with me. So where was I? We were talking about how hourglass shapes were already the desirable thing, even in the Iliad and the Odyssey. And they were using all these things to help achieve that, whether it was soft leather or metal girdles. So later, the ancient Romans, they're the ones who came in with a little different style there. The ideal shape was smaller breasts, but still, childbirthing hips. So just a slender top with broad shoulders, but still shapely in the hip region. Binders were used. There was even this rheumatoid dismay even during intercourse. They still kept those binders on. So, I don't know. It's just what I read, people. But yeah, no one really knows why that shift happened. My speculation is, the Romans really admired intelligence and orderliness and, just this evolution of society. So I do think that maybe breasts were seen as a dumb thing to have, to be more manly in that way. That's just, I'm spitballing here. That's what I'm thinking. Maybe. Now we are entering into the Middle Ages here. And the Middle Ages is defined as this big chunk of time, 10 centuries worth of time. That was a really long chunk of time. Like I said, 10 centuries. That's a long time. But style and all that stuff wasn't a thing to even marvel at or to aim for, and everything was so pious. It was just fashion. Even though obviously it existed, it just wasn't a thing anyone talked about. Women wore at that time tightly laced bodices. A lot of times it was stuffed with paste to keep that tight shape in the middle there, and they usually wore flowing dresses underneath it. So it really was just to accentuate the smallness, I guess, of your ribs, that area. Still enforcing the hourglass shape despite it being so pious at the time. So that's something to know. Alright, I brought in that heat to, give it that little depth there. I'm gonna now use Solar, which is that hot yellow that I was talking about. Where is it? Right there. I'm gonna use that brush and just see what that looks like on the lid. No, it's definitely muted. I need a white base for that. What I will do though is leave this color down and then add some of the shimmer on top. Let's see. It's a good shimmer here. I'm going to use quartz to make that yellow sparkly and a little deeper here. Okay, yeah. Still looks yellowish, but now it's a little sparkly. We got to roll with the punches here. Got to figure it out sometime. So I am going to kind of figure out the other eye. I'm going to snap right back into it, and then we're going to talk about the Victorian era. 1, 2, 3. Alright guys, so I am back and I ended up looking like a leaf or something with my eyes. I did want it to be kind of fall-like, but I definitely want to try out that yellow. So I would say, you guys, if you want that true kind of punch of a color, you definitely need to use a white base. I didn't use a white base, but I mixed it with, this is called Solar and Quartz, and it kind of made this sunsetty thing that I did here. So, I think it worked out okay. I always try to pull it together somehow. Actually, I said before the snap that we were going to talk about the Victorian era, but I wanted to actually bring into the Elizabethan era because they do look a little different. While I put on my foundation, I'm going to be using this CoverGirl Outlast Active. This is just my shade right now. So with the Elizabethan era, it very much wanted it to be like a tube all the way down to the hips, and then it broadened out. So the corset at that time was just kind of like it wanted everything to be very flat. Yeah, flat, tube rounded, if that makes sense. I'll show a picture. Broomstick is what I think of. That's what was popular during that time, and so the shapewear reflected that. So now we're creeping into the Victorian era, which is late 19th century. Now this is kind of like the height of sexuality being taboo, but if you look at what the silhouette was, it was quite voluptuous under a lot of layers, but very voluptuous. I just found that to be really ironic. Very much that shape going on. And this is also like the most dramatic of shapewears too. We're talking whalebone and hard canvas and steel. To stop corsets from being used in such an accentuated way was actually the Great War, aka World War I. Women were actually encouraged not to purchase anything that required steel to help with the war efforts. Plus, the popular silhouette was changing to the 1920s, where everything needs to be very straight. So all shapewear was used at that time to bind down curve, make everything fit into this straightened silhouette that was popular in the 20s. So this slimming thing from the waist down actually didn't really go out of style to the 30s and the 40s. The bust line was accentuated again, but waist was still kind of binding down the hips and the buttocks area. This didn't really start changing until I would say late 40s, when we're talking pinups, and 50s, when we're talking about the housewife and A-line. So if we're talking 50s, think bullet bras. Subtle, well, not subtle girdles, but girdles and bullet bras. So the bullet bra and girdles were very important for the 50s figure. In the 60s, that didn't really change much, but it wasn't as, I would say, structured. More sheer materials were entered in, and matching bra and panty sets were common. It's not as formal and as accentuated as it was as we get further into the 20th century decades. 70s, actually, there was a complete rebellion against bras because of the movement. I would say that actually started in the late 60s with the hippie movement, but a good bit of women stopped wearing bras in the 70s, and fashion actually supported it. There were many outfits that were designed not to be worn with undergarments. When we get to the 80s, think power suits. Not necessarily Madonna, but power suits. And under those, though, you see the influence of figures like Madonna, where line between lingerie and underwear are starting to mesh together. So undergarments are becoming more formal in the way of lingerie versus structured pieces. So now we're talking the 90s, where the Wonder Bra is introduced. And think of the Victoria's Secret silhouette. Yeah, the supermodels walking down the Victoria's Secret runway. That's what we think of when we think of 90s shapewear. The super push-up bras, and that was shapewear for that decade. Now we're entering into the 2000s, and that is the invention of Spanx. Founder Sarah Blakely, she described it as shapewear in disguise. So it's doing all the work, but very discreetly. It was a big Hollywood secret for most of that decade. The average person really wasn't in tune to it, but enter the 2010s, this last decade, that's when it became just widespread. I know I got my first bit of shapewear from, I think that was Target, and it looked a lot like how the original Spanx did. We're gonna review all this stuff in our fashion footnote. Alright guys, so in this week in Fashion Fridays, we're going over the history of shapewear, which goes all the way back to 1600 BC. We're talking ancient Greece, where they were using leather, bendable and mendable materials to accentuate the female form. The breasts were out, but everything else is pretty much binded in to create this hourglass figure. And to be honest with you, this shape has been a defining footprint in what we consider to be desirable in most sections of history as we continue through. This didn't really even change through even the Middle Ages, until we got to the Elizabethan era, where tube was really more common outside the Romans. But tubing, where we were just structuring these beautiful, overzealous garments in which they wanted to accentuate the detailing on the bodice and push the breasts down, but they still wanted the hips, the broom-like shape that was supported by petticoats and all this other stuff. And then we moved into the Victorian era, where these extreme measures of very top-heavy, very tiny waist, and very voluptuous behind, despite it being a very pious age as well as the Middle Ages, that was a desirable silhouette, and it went to as far as using steel to create those extremes. This didn't change until World War I, really, where steel was used for war efforts, and therefore silhouettes started to change and reflect the changing society. Suffragists were actually part of the movement of getting rid of this huge voluptuous figure that was so defined by the Victorian era for femininity, and that's where these very thin silhouettes came into play, and all the corsetry was actually used to bind down and create these very tube and straight like silhouettes. But that was kind of abandoned as soon as we got into the pinup ages in the late 30s and the 40s, and then in the 50s we're getting the classic A-line, where you have, again, a small waist, but a bellowed out A-line, and you had a bullet bra to support that on top. As time went on into the later decades, we had all these different movements where a bra was abandoned and fashion supported that, but it was quickly embraced again with femininity when we started talking about in the late 80s. The lines became blurred between lingerie and actual underwear. Victoria's Secret pushed that even further. Enter the 2000s, where Spanx is invented, and that changes shapewear forever. I mean, you can't even go into Walmart or any other big box store that's around the world where you can have access to these pieces. They're separates, they're full body suits, there's some just for the thighs. It's just amazing what's available for everyone now. Thank you guys so much for joining me for this edition of Color and Beauty. I hope you enjoyed this topic. It was suggested by Astrid, actually, because she's the one who introduced me to shapewear. I didn't wear it for a long time. So, but I'm a big fan of it now, especially for big events. If you did enjoy it, make sure you give it a like. Leave a comment below what you guys want to hear about next on your next Fashion Friday. And make sure you hit that notification bell and subscribe to our channel. Go to our Instagram. It's Color and Beauty. That's ITSCOLOUR, because yes, we are worldly like that. Thank you so much, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.